Winning a war doesn't depend solely on brute force. It depends on strategy. Instead of confronting the enemy directly, it's possible to bring them down by minimizing your own losses. That's exactly what happened in Donetsk. While Moscow believes it is making a strong advance through the Lyman corridor, the reality on the battlefield is quite different. Maps indicate progress, occupied cities, and a seemingly unstoppable offensive. But this narrative is nothing more than an illusion. On the ground, no Ukrainian lines are actually being broken. What exists, in practice, is a carefully laid trap. Russian forces are being slowly drawn into an invisible infiltration network. Small, highly mobile Ukrainian units operate silently behind enemy lines, destabilizing the entire operation. While the Kremlin celebrates a victory on paper, Ukraine holds key positions and advances surgically. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. This is the new war, not based on large offensives, but on precise, discreet, and devastating movements. These groups, coordinating in real time with drones, provide precise intelligence for the artillery, while simultaneously carrying out targeted attacks against local command centers. The gains at Ozerna and Yampol were achieved through this systematic and attritional tactic. So, how is the Russian command reporting this situation to its superiors? This is precisely the point that is dragging Putin towards disaster. Zaporizhia front completely exposed this structural mechanism of deception. High-ranking officers of the General Staff of the Russian 29th Army were inspecting the command post of the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade under their command. The brigade commanders presented a huge victory map on the table. The map showed extensive territorial gains, captured strategic villages, and fortified positions. However, before approving the map, the officials sent a reconnaissance drone into the air to see the local situation with their own eyes. The image that appeared on the screen was a complete scandal. The red zones on the map bore absolutely no relation to the actual situation on the ground. The gains existed only on paper. The units were not at the designated points, and the villages allegedly captured were under Ukrainian control. This incident is not an isolated lie, but a symptom of a deadly virus that has infiltrated the Russian army. In the armies of authoritarian regimes, information from the field becomes distorted as it moves up the chain of command. Because failure is punished, the system begins to produce lies. These lies within the chain of command pave the way for an even greater strategic disaster in the south. Russia's plans for 2026 were clear. The main theater of the major offensive in the spring and summer would be Zaporizhia. The Kremlin's plan was to launch an offensive from Orikhiv towards Zaporizhia, bringing the city within artillery range and attempting to encircle it. But Ukraine not only identified these preparations, it decided to act before the attack began. With an active defense strategy, Ukrainian forces advanced in the south and completely disrupted Russian plans. They recaptured areas such as Siknev and Rybin and, in the most critical move, came within a few kilometers of a vital logistics route near Huliaipol. This was decisive. In war, it's not necessary to block a route, it's enough to put it under fire. By doing so, Ukraine turned Russian convoys into constant targets, compromising the supply of troops with ammunition, fuel, and evacuation. The Russian reaction shows the impact. Moscow was forced to deploy elite units and strategic reserves to prevent the collapse of the line. As a result, resources prepared for a major offensive were now being consumed in defense. The result is clear. Russia lost the initiative. By attacking at the right time and place, while the enemy was preparing, Ukraine managed to thwart months of Kremlin planning in just a few weeks. This loss of initiative on the southern front was merely the visible face of a much broader Ukrainian strategy. If Putin truly wants to understand why his army is unable to advance, he must look not at the front line, but hundreds of kilometers behind it, to the logistical centers. On March 16 and 17, 2026, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces launched a massive and coordinated wave of attacks, using long-range FP-12 unmanned aerial vehicles against the logistical networks that form the backbone of the entire Russian war machine. The selection of these targets was not random. They were surgical operations aimed at blinding, deafening, and immobilizing the Russian army. A large supply depot, generator complexes, and, most importantly, an electronic warfare station at the Kherson airfield in Sevastopol were destroyed. The destruction of the electronic warfare system means that all Russian airspace in that region is now completely open to Ukrainian drones. According to data from the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, during the same period, a Tor M2U air defense system, valued at billions of rubles and which was on patrol in Bryansk, was destroyed. In occupied Crimea, the coordinates of the Bastion coastal missile system were identified and targeted. In Donetsk, the communications center in Mangush was disabled. The fuel depot in Melitopol turned into a huge fireball. Ammunition depots in Stepnoy and Terpenia were blown up. Kherson region, a drone training center where Russia trained its future operators, was destroyed, along with the personnel on site. UAV control points in Huliaipol and Obrotnoy were neutralized. We must focus closely on this analysis. None of the targets hit were frontline trenches or infantry units. Ukraine isn't just cutting off fingers, it's cutting the arteries that lead directly to the heart. In modern warfare, a T-90 tank without ammunition is nothing more than an expensive pile of metal weighing 46 tons. A convoy of armored personnel carriers without fuel is nothing more than coffins waiting in the middle of the road. A Russian commander whose command center has been hit is a deaf and dumb man, unable to issue orders to his troops. If you hit an enemy tank on the front line, another will replace it. But if you hit the enemy's repair base, even a simple track failure will force that tank to retreat hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory. This means the logistics network is completely paralyzed. Drone units have destroyed tens of thousands of pieces of Russian military equipment and personnel, not by directly engaging them, but by disabling their ability to fight. Putin's army may appear superior in troop numbers on the front lines, but the moment you can't supply these soldiers with food, ammunition, and fuel, this massive army ceases to exist as such. It simply transforms into a panicked mass fighting for survival. All of this points to a single truth in military literature: the concept of traditional warfare is dead. As Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky stated clearly that the nature of war has undergone a fundamental evolution. There are no longer fixed front lines, drawn with a ruler on a map, full of soldiers. Trench warfare has given way to a fluid and constantly moving network of infiltration and death. The infiltration zones of Ukrainian forces extend up to 10 kilometers behind what Russia calls its controlled front line. In the past, capturing a position and holding it for days was considered a success. Today, however, remaining stationary in one position for more than 24 hours means becoming an immediate target for a kamikaze drone or a precision artillery projectile coming from the sky. Drones are in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Fields, intersections, and trails are constantly monitored. An armored vehicle is detected and destroyed miles away before it can even get close to the front line. The war has become a technological race, not about who controls more territory on the map, but about who can see the furthest and strike first. Russia's traditional military mindset has failed to adapt to this new reality. Gerasimov still tries to push columns of tanks across open terrain and apply breakthrough tactics inherited from World War II. The result is a statistical defeat. It is precisely here that we need to look at the numbers. During the nearly 2-year period from February 2024 the most intense phase of the war, until January 2026, Russian forces managed to advance only 50 kilometers along the Avdiivka-Pokrovsk axis. Let's analyze this mathematically. Russia advanced, on average, only 70 meters per day in exchange for tens of thousands of casualties and hundreds of billions of dollars in equipment. This isn't even a walking distance, it's a crawling distance. Despite all this destruction since the beginning of 2022, Russia has only managed to take control of another 1.5% of Ukraine's total territory. The active defense strategy implemented by Syrskyi managed to disrupt the Russian attack formations before they could even consolidate, while they were still in their concentration areas. Russia is expending an immense amount of energy. It is crashing against a wall with enormous force. And the only thing it gets in return is a few square kilometers of mined terrain reduced to rubble. But the cost of this slowdown for Russia cannot be measured solely in lost tanks. The real disaster lies in the human resources consumed by this senseless advance. All these command errors, logistical disasters, and tactical blindness have an ultimate cost. And it's not Putin or his generals who are paying that price. That cost is being directly deducted from the demographic future of the Russian people. Today, Russia can no longer replace its battlefield losses. This is not an estimate. It is an official breaking point. A historic milestone was surpassed in January 2026. The Russian army's casualty rate officially exceeded the rate of new recruits. That month, the system managed to recruit only 22,000 new soldiers. In contrast, the number of dead and seriously wounded on the front lines was recorded at 30,618. The situation was no different in December 2025. The system is now bleeding, and there is no bandage capable of stopping this bleeding. We need to understand what this means for the Kremlin. In the early days of the war, when the winds of patriotism were blowing strongly, it was easy to find between 40,000 and 50,000 volunteers per month. Today, however, even offering astronomical sums, the state cannot find even 30,000 per month. Since 2022, one-time signing bonuses for those going to the front lines have increased between 15 and 20 times. These bonuses and salaries alone will have 2 trillion rubles disappeared from the budget in the first half of 2025. But the economy can only sustain this for so long. In regions like Samara, Tatarstan, and Mari El, budgets have been completely depleted. Recruitment bonuses have been suddenly reduced from 3.6 million rubles to 400,000 rubles. Running out of money means the flow of soldiers stops. Since war no longer holds any ideological appeal, this is nothing more than a deadly exchange. Even more alarming is the profile of those who accept this money and go to the front lines. According to Mediazona's detailed mortality analysis, the average age of Russian soldiers killed in 2025 reached a startling level. The age group with the highest mortality rate on the front lines is between 46 and 52 years old. This is the tragedy of people who sell their lives to the state out of economic desperation. While the youth of the Moscow and St. Petersburg elites remain in cafes, the entire weight of the war was placed on the shoulders of the poorest, most desperate, and ethnically minority regions of Russia, such as Tuva and Buryatia. And when consuming his own people was no longer enough, Putin began to look for solutions abroad. More than 18,000 foreigners from 128 different countries were deceived with false promises of jobs, citizenship, or high salaries and sent to the front lines. More than 1,700 people from Africa alone were tricked with the promise of factory work, given weapons, and thrown into a killing zone. But the Kremlin's real nightmare is not the dead or the wounded. The real nightmare is those who are alive but have rebelled against this system. According to estimates by military analysts, the number of deserters, those who have laid down their arms and fled, disobeyed orders, or gone into hiding, in the Russian army has exceeded 70,000. This number represents 10% of all forces mobilized at the front. 1/10 of an army refuses to fight or obey its own officers. This is not just a military problem. It is a direct collapse of morale, discipline, and authority. Despite all these rational facts, the demographic collapse, the disrupted supply lines, and the massive lies within the command structure, Russia will continue attacking. Even if conditions on the battlefield have turned completely against him, Putin has no choice but to continue sending tanks. Because in authoritarian regimes, internal legitimacy depends on a constant narrative of progress and greatness. Standing still on the front lines is interpreted as weakness in the corridors of the Kremlin, and weakness means the end for a leader like Putin. Putin's ambition for a greater Russia is rapidly approaching a tipping point, trapped in its own narrative, which is already beginning to take its toll. Meanwhile, Ukraine is gaining an advantage by combining technology, strategy, and initiative on the battlefield, and that limit is drawing ever closer. In your opinion, can the Kremlin still reverse this leadership crisis and contain the defections? Leave your comment. And if you want to continue following geopolitical analyses based on facts and data, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. See you in the next analysis.